Well, this is a shock. A Ford Skyliner, a retractable in a junkyard. Now, these were built between 1957 and 1959, and this one is, of course, a 59, the third and final year for these things. These were priced about $350 more than a regular Sunliner convertible, but are absolutely a very different car. Now, you know, for decades before the arrival of these cars in 1957, Detroit automakers struggled to combine the benefits of an open-aired convertible, the sportiness of that, and the weather-tight features of a hardtop. Well, Ford finally delivered in 1957 with the Skyliner. With the push of a button inside, you get a series of electric motors and hydraulic ramps, which then raise this roof, which is articulated in two components. It then folds down underneath the deck lid, which then closes, and you go from the convenience of a hardtop to the fun of a convertible. It's a pretty cool piece. Now, this is an absolute landmark post-war automobile, and what a shock it is to see this thing in a junkyard. Now, they're not particularly rare, but of the 3 years these were built, this is by far the most scarce. The thing with this is that this is Ford's new 1-year 1959 body. It's kind of square, kind of clunky, but it's also the final application of this, the forward hinged hood, which kind of takes its cues from the Ford Thunderbird. In the late 50s, Ford did have an overhead valve inline 6, but it was never available in the Skyliner in 57, 8, and 9. The reason is these cars are pretty heavy with all that mechanism, and I think Ford figured that the power-to-weight ratio would be pretty lame. So as a result, all Skyliners came with one of three engines: the 292 Y-block with 200 horsepower, the 332 two-barrel with 225 horsepower, or the big dog, the 300 horsepower 352 four-barrel. Which one do we have here? Let's take a look. Okay, all right, this looks to be an FE big block. This is either the 332 or the 352. And again, 1958 was the first year for Ford's FE family big block, and here in 59 is the second application. Now, this engine actually has a lot of legacy. These actually became big NASCAR race engines in the early 60s at 427 cubic inches. But here in this car, we see it in a pretty humble state of tune. Let's take a closer look at the retractable roof. Now, there's a hinge right here, a seam, so that when the roof rises up, it can articulate and fold down underneath this panel right here. Now, when this goes up, there are rams and hinges that allow all that to tuck down inside, and then this closes down quietly and gently, and voila, you go from a hardtop to a convertible in about 1 minute's time. It all happens from the driver's seat. You just push a button. The motor has to be running because it takes a fair amount of electricity to run all these relays and motors, but 1 minute later, you've made the transition. The Skyliner shared the same basic dash and instrument cluster as Fairlane's, except for one thing. There's a hole right here where the switch to actuate the roof used to be. Now, it's specific to these cars and it always goes missing. People grab them for their restorations. Now, keep in mind, this whole system is electric, but there are no computers involved. This all happened years before microprocessors, but this same basic idea has been emulated by Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and even Chrysler. But it happened right here first, Ford Skyliner. Cool. Now, if this was mine, well, I gotta say, over 12,000 of these cars were built, so they're not particularly rare. Trouble is, this one is so rusty that it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this thing back to square one. So I think I would let it go. I'd part it out as they're doing, so that the parts and pieces can allow other Skyliners to live on. Speaking of living on, let's move on and see what else we can find here at the Boneyard. Oh, this is that 69 Z28 they're talking about.